welcome back to Well, That's Interesting, the I don't know which one to explain first edition. Today is episode 221. Let's talk about the black frogs of Chernobyl and the absolute bonkers history of the reclining birth position. My friends, today is one of those days where I closed my eyes and stuck my hand in the old bucket of topics, which is actually a 500-plus list on the show's Google Drive, in order to pick two, completely at random. And holy shit. First, let me say, although I do have 500-plus things to talk about with you, please do not hesitate to DM, email, or at me with a topic you think is interesting and needs to be shared with the flock. I always want to hear from you. Links are in the show's description. Just give it a scroll down. 2, leaving today's show to chance, I believe, nay, I know, absolutely paid off. This is fucking weird. In the first half of the show, we are dipping back into evolution and how, on occasion, it doesn't take millennia for a species to adapt. Every so often, us humans are lucky enough to witness nature doing her thing within our lifetime, and unfortunately, it's usually because we fucked something up. For example, about a month ago, in episode 218, 2 billion-year-old rock found with live microbes and the rapid evolution of Mozambique's tuskless elephants, we learned about the Mozambican Civil War, a brutal conflict which occurred between 1977 and 1992. For 15 years, a number of untold atrocities took place, and to fund them, each side of the war resorted to the illegal wildlife trade. The impact was so horrifying. A study released in 2019 revealed that 90% of elephants, hippopotamuses, buffalo, zebra, and wildebeest were gone from one national park alone, the Gorongosa National Park. My friends, what elephants did survive were tuskless, and as such their genes carried on, and to this day, today, the prides at Gorongosa have a skewed number of tuskless elephants. Speaking of today, we are moving on from war to nuclear disasters, and let's just dive right in with some quick facts about the Chernobyl nuclear power plant disaster, which occurred on April 26, 1986, in Ukraine, then a part of the Soviet Union, a band Putin is trying to get back together in some midlife crisis. Anyway, it was the largest uncontrolled radioactive release in history, so far, caused by a flawed reactor design and safety violations during a test, resulting in a steam explosion and fire that released significant amounts of radiation into the environment. And when I say significant, I mean it. More than 400 times more radiation was emitted here than what was released by the atomic bombs dropped on Hiroshima, Japan, in 1945 by the good old US of A. An exclusion zone was created around the plant within days. More than 350,000 people were evacuated. But despite the efforts, 28 of the site's 600 workers died in the first 4 months after the event. Upon the disaster's 20th anniversary, as reported by John Vidal of The Guardian in a series of reports published in 2006, at least 30,000 people were expected to die of cancers linked directly to severe radiation exposure in 1986, and up to 500,000 people may have already died from environmental and biological effects. The situation was so bleak, it was believed Chernobyl would be destined to be a barren wasteland. However, 39 years after the accident, the area has blossomed into one of the largest nature reserves in Europe. Brown bears, bison, wolves, lynxes, Przewalski horses, more than 200 bird species, bumblebees, earthworms, bacteria, a random-ass population of 302 feral dogs thought to be descendants of pets that were left behind. These are just some of the creatures thriving. There's also pitch-black frogs. My friends, the eastern San Antonio frog is the classic kind of frog, kind of green frog you imagine when someone says the word frog. But here in Chernobyl, They're black. We're going to find out why, and how this evolutionary trait took place in less than a wee 4 decades. Then after the break, something so common in Western countries, it's not even a thought. When someone is about to give birth, more often than not, in general, they're taken to a hospital and placed on a reclining gurney. This piqued the curiosity of Professor Lauren Dundius. It turns out this practice of the reclining position turned up around the late 1500s, early 1600s. Why? The earliest depictions of birth all show women giving birth in positions other than laying on their backs. We will get into those depictions. We will get into those theories as to why this change took place in the West. And they're kind of wild. Was it because of a perverted king whose kink transformed into an accepted custom by the public? Was it due to a rise in a new lucrative field, competitive men, and a 17th century French doctor who called pregnancy, quote, a tumor of the belly, and as such only doctors should be in the room, leaving no room for the midwife, who were traditionally women and had methods of their own? Was it a little from column A? Was it a little from column B? It's going to be fun. In the meantime, hi, I'm Jill Chacha, and if this is your first time listening, welcome to the flock, my newborn business goose. To begin, we're going to pack for a weekend getaway, but I must advise, do avoid bringing shorts, skirts, dresses, t-shirts, sandals, or high heels. In fact, you might just want to focus on bringing long pants, long sleeve shirts, closed-toed shoes, honestly, whatever can cover most of your body. And if it sounds like I'm sucking the fun out of this spontaneous holiday, once you hear where we're going, you might find yourself Googling Tyvek suits. My friends, we are headed to the enchanted Red Forest, and why exactly it's enchanted and where exactly it may be, don't worry, I've got you. And by the way, the DuPont Tyvek 800J is pretty great. Anyway, everyone, please imagine Poland. Great, we were just there a few weeks ago during episode 215 to see about some clams, and now I'd like you to move your eyes down and to the right. Wonderful. There is Ukraine, or at least that's what it's called at the time of this recording. Shit is hitting a fan set on high. In the meantime, I'd like you to point to the middle of the northern border. Here, my covered business goose, is Chernobyl, which is located a wee mind-blowing 90 kilometers or 60 miles north of Kyiv. That's it. Surrounding the Chernobyl nuclear power plant within the exclusion zone is a 4 square mile area nicknamed the Red Forest, which, after being doused with the highest levels of radiation during the accident, found its classic green pine trees rapidly turning ginger brown and, well, red, an indication of death. This site is also known for a few other things. One, although less than 10% of the radiation emitted during the accident remains, the Red Forest is still one of the most contaminated areas in the world today. 2. As such, the forest has been completely evacuated after the majority of the pine trees were bulldozed and buried in trenches by a handful of hardcore civil and military personnel called liquidators. 3. Despite the cleanup efforts, there is a concern that the trees will decay, that the radioactive contaminants will leach into, you guessed it, the groundwater. And 4, and I think this one is something we could all relate to at some point in our lives, the Red Forest and the exclusion zone also goes by the name Zone of Alienation. And finally, 5, despite that emo, bang-swept vibe, this place, the Red Forest, is fucking poppin'. Despite the lack of a human presence, or perhaps due to a lack of a human presence, Chernobyl's wildlife populations are reclaiming their space. In March of 2019, 30 researchers from the United Kingdom, Ireland, France, Belgium, Norway, Spain, and Ukraine met in Portsmouth, England, to present the latest results of their work on the area. One particular study, led by Nick Beresford of the UK's Centre for Ecology and Hydrology, along with the Tree Project, there you go, aka the Transfer Exposure Effects Project, they had the ingenious idea of planting motion detection cameras in different areas of the exclusion alienation zone for several years. The images they gathered shocked the world. Quote, "These cameras recorded the first observation of brown bears and European bison inside the Ukrainian side of the zone, as well as the increase in the number of wolves and Przewalski horses." End quote from Germaine Arizuela's essay over at The Conversation. My friends, if you're driving, don't even pull over. Pick up your phone immediately. In fact, everyone, please pick up your phone. If you head on over to today's post over at our social media stuffs, you will see a collage of creatures, including the European bison, the boreal lynx, there's moose and brown bear that call the Red Forest home. And if you swipe past that collage, you're going to see a photo of two frogs. I've just pulled them up here myself, and to be honest, at face value, it looks like you're looking at night and day. The one on the left is gorgeous and solid black. The one to the right is a classic green frog. The only thing they appear to have in common is their size. They are exactly the same shape and weight. But my friends, appearances here are deceiving. These are the exact same species. My bright business goose, may I introduce to you the eastern tree frog. On the left, we have a specimen captured in Chernobyl inside the exclusion/alienation exclusion zone. And on the right, a specimen captured outside the zone. My friends, Germaine Arizuela, who I mentioned a moment ago, is an associate professor in zoology at the Department of Biology of Organisms and Systems at the University of Oviedo. Nailed it. He, too, was one of the many researchers granted access to the Red Forest. And it was he and his team who found these frogs. It was their work with the amphibians of Chernobyl that helped shift scientists and really anyone's view of what survival looks like in the face of major radiological disaster. Within 40 years, the creatures here, including the eastern tree frog, are starting to show adaptive responses that allow them to cope with radiation and to live inside the exclusion zone. Let's get into it. Back in its own disaster, I'm feeling feels. Back in its own disaster of 2016, Germaine and the gang began searching for life alongside the dilapidated Reactor 4, the exact reactor where history was made. It was here, of all places, where the team spotted several darkly tinted frogs, which, after some analysis, turned out to be Hyla orientalis, the eastern tree frog, and it's known for its bright green, picture-perfect froggy postcard appearance. Needless to say, this inspired them to scoop up a large sample in order to figure out what in the holy hell is going on here and why. Between 2017 and 2019, they captured 189 male eastern tree frogs in 14 different locations, ranging from the Red Forest itself to sites outside the Chernobyl exclusion zone to use as controls. Now, it's not very often in studies where you could look at the animals in a sample and say with clear confidence which ones came from where, but in this case, I think we could play a game called Which Frog Do You Think Came From Where? And to play, all you need to do is head on over to our social media stuffs, tap on today's post, and swipe past the picture of the two frogs from before. What you're going to see is a jaw-dropping color gradient that looks like a wall of paint swatches in Home Depot. In the photo are 5 frogs, whose shading goes from bright green fading into pitch black. And it's fucking wild. I think I know at least where 2 of them were found. Now, Germain and the gang did more than just give them a look-see. They analyzed the dorsal skin of these creatures, and in a study parallel to this, they, quote, calculated the level of radiation absorbed based on the environmental radiation, the cesium content in their muscles, and strontium in their bones, end quote, said Pablo Barraco, a collaborator and researcher at the Guys, I'm so American. I cannot speak. I can't say words. Said Pablo Barraco, a collaborator and researcher at the Donana Biological Station, and I am so sorry about that. Anyway, what did they find? Drum roll, please. Thank you in the back. To absolutely no one's surprise, the team's work revealed that the Chernobyl tree frogs have a much darker coloration than frogs captured in control areas outside the zone. As to why, the team looked into the area's existing fungi and the role of melanin. My friends, way the fuck back in January of 2021, when WTI was just a budding sprout itself, we covered Chernobyl's black fungi. We learned that a discovery took place in 1991 inside the Chernobyl nuclear reactor itself. They found fungi sprouting right there out of its walls, just walls bathed in radiation. As technology developed over the years, creating safe ways to collect samples, it wasn't until 2007 when researchers discovered that the amounts of melanin that create the fungi's usual color and would normally absorb light is now in this environment absorbing all the ambient radiation and converting that into usable, delicious energy. Think photosynthesis, but instead of the sun's rays, it's the radioactive rays coming from reactor 4 that are captured and converted instead. Now, the frogs Germain and the gang analyzed, they weren't converting radiation into food, but their melanin played a role here too. Quote, melanin absorbs and dissipates part of the radiation energy. It could also scavenge and neutralize ionized molecules inside the cell. These actions make it less likely that individuals exposed to radiation will go on to suffer cell damage and increase their survival chances. The results of our study suggest that Chernobyl's frogs could have undergone a process of rapid evolution in response to radiation. In this scenario, those frogs with darker coloration at the time of the accident, which normally represent a minority in their populations, would have been favored by the protective action of melanin. The dark frogs would have survived the radiation better and reproduced more successfully, end quote, said Germain in the study's press release. My friends, it's estimated these frogs faded to black within 10 to 15 generations. I'll say that again, 10 to 15 generations. And that's not all they found. First, some quick fun facts about frogs and genes. Okay, it is possible to calculate the age of a frog by counting the growth lines of their bones that form each year, kind of like tree rings. You could also age frogs using the length of the telomeres as a marker. Now, what the fuck is that? Those babies are located at the end of chromosomes. They protect genetic material and actually shorten with each cell division. This is all to say the team gave these a gander, and wouldn't you know it, the radiation levels experienced by the frogs living in Chernobyl, it did not affect their age or their rate of aging. In fact, when compared with specimens captured in control areas without radiation, there was no significant difference. Their melanin, it's like a fucking armor. But, and of course, there's a but, not all creatures have adjusted so well. As mentioned by Germain in his article for The Conversation, some insects seem to have a shorter lifespan and are more affected by parasites in areas of higher radiation. I'm on a roll. Some birds also have higher levels of albinism, and according to the wiki, leaf litter and trunks of dead trees in the red forest, they decay at a far slower rate than is typical for average forests. researchers found that microorganisms responsible for decomposing forest litter, quote, do not act on such a matter within the contaminated zone at nearly the same rate seen in forests outside the zone. As a result, the amount of detritus, or the major fuel of wildfires, is significantly larger than in other forests. Fire risks are therefore elevated compared with those in other forests with similar climatic conditions. End quote. There is certainly a mixed bag here, but honestly, the fact that there is any good news at all after such a nightmare that is a nuclear disaster is kind of inspiring and fascinating. It makes you feel less shitty, and we can use that. After the break, you might feel a little shitty after this one. We'll be doing a little more time traveling in an attempt to answer a question that you may have never asked or even thought about, but too bad we're doing it. Why did the reclining birth position take off in the West, and why can we trace it back to the 1600s? It's fucking crazy. Stay tuned.
I think you're on mute.
Workday starting to sound the same?
I think you're on mute.
Find something that sounds better for your career on LinkedIn. With LinkedIn Job Collections, you can browse curated collections by relevant industries and benefits, like flex PTO or hybrid workplaces, so you can find the right job for you. Get started at linkedin.com/jobs. Finding where you fit. LinkedIn knows how.
So this is History Uncovered, and I'm Kalina.
And I'm Austin. We are the co-hosts of the show.
History Uncovered is a podcast presented by All That's Interesting, where we both are writers. We cover all sorts of topics: true crime, unsolved mysteries, history, folklore, the paranormal, you name it.
We've been doing this now for more than 100 episodes, covering a wide range of topics, and probably something that's bound to be interesting for everyone out there.
Absolutely. And in addition to our normal episodes, we also do a history happy hour about the recent news in the world of history and archaeology, which we cover daily on the site, as well as important historical anniversaries.
We also have done some special series. We've done one on the Titanic, doing one on Jack the Ripper, done one about some famous UFO sightings. So if all of that sounds like something that might be interesting to you, and you like having a good time, learning new things, and maybe laughing or just groaning at some bad puns, check out History Uncovered everywhere you get your podcasts.
And we're back. We are so back. And my friends, we're going to talk about a little thing called the French position, which is not as steamy as you think. It's the reclining or semi-recumbent delivery position that for the past 400 years or so has been the go-to birthing position for the Western world. But if you're the curious type, and you are, that's why you're here, you might be thinking, well, what was going on prior to those 400 years? And what sparked that change? If those questions crossed your mind, you're not alone. Lauren Dundas, who is now a professor of sociology and criminology over at McDaniel College, she approached this topic way ahead of her time, during one of the most conservative periods in American history. During the bullshit Reagan era, in 1987, she published a 6-page article in the American Journal of Public Health, in the Public Health Then and Now section. And boy howdy, I am so glad I found it. It brought up a few things that led me down a rabbit hole that I can't unsee, and now, like the ring, I must pass it on to live. You'll know what I mean in a minute. In the meantime, let's talk about the earliest records of maternal birth positions, all which include references to kneeling, squatting, sitting, and standing for labor and delivery. And my friends, these records go way back. And one of the best examples I'm about to provide may just blow your mind. Join me, will you, at the Temple of Esna in Egypt, located in Luxor, which is a wee 485 miles from Cairo. On one of its walls is etched a scene, a woman in a kneeling position, surrounded by 5 attendants, who are also women. From the kneeling woman, a smaller figure is brought forth into the arms of one of the attendants, and I have to warn you, this is not in proportion. please, drop whatever baby it is you are holding and pick up your phone. Head on over to our social media stuffs and tap on today's post to have a look. The newborn figure is giving Alien Romulus vibes, and if you have no idea what I'm talking about, just give the title of the movie a Google and scroll until you see something lanky. Anyway, let's draw our focus back to the scene. Not only does this relief memorialize the birth, but how it took place and who it features. The mother here is kneeling, and her upper body is being supported by one of the attendants. This method seems to be good enough for a queen, because in this scene, it is none other than Cleopatra VII. Yeah, that Cleopatra, the first one that comes to mind, and is the last active ruler of the Ptolemaic Kingdom of Egypt, who was first chased out of Egypt by her sibling/husband Ptolemy XIII after she tried to take sole possession of the throne. That Cleopatra, who was like, okay, let's go to war about it, and then teamed up with Julius Caesar, leading to Ptolemy drowning in the Nile River. That Cleopatra, who, following the war, joined Julius in Rome in 46 BC, but had to skedaddle after Caesar was stabbed to death in the Roman Senate in 44 BC. That Cleopatra, who then married her younger brother, Ptolemy XIV, just to murder him, in a bid to make her son co-ruler. And guess what? My familial business goose, that lanky baby in this scene is that son, born back in 47 BC. Behold, Caesarion, named after his father, Julius Caesar. Now, that is a lot of drama, but what I mean to say is that this depiction includes some of the most important, powerful people in the world, and the method upon which one of them came into the world included a squatting or kneeling position. For queens to us lowly paupers, copying something of a squat was the way to go. And to assist, the birthing chair or birthing stool was invented, dating back to the Babylonian times 2,000 years ago. I've actually got an example of it over at our social media stuffs if you'd like to take a peek. Looks cozy. Anyway, the design. The concept was a hit, and its use spread around the world. Even in Western Europe, until about 1550, these chairs were whipped out, and midwives were the only attendants at births. So, what happened? What could undo centuries upon centuries of custom and verified practices? If you thought to yourself, I wonder if it has anything to do with classism, capitalism, mansplaining, and maybe even a little bit of creep factor thrown in, you're right. Let's take a glimpse at a segment of the social structure/caste system of Europe at the time. As so wonderfully explained by Lauren Dundas, quote, in the mid-1550s, barber surgeons began to compete with midwives for obstetric cases. Initially, these surgeons were poorly trained. Their social rank remained on par with that of carpenters, shoemakers, and other members of guilds known collectively as the arts and trades until the 18th century. As time progressed, they sought recognition for the obstetric skills they had acquired in delivering women whose lives were threatened as a result of complications. Achieving recognition for their skills, however, was made difficult due to their status, and because exposure of women's bodies to men was considered indecent. Physicians, though, were granted special privileges and accorded higher status than surgeons, and they were not eager for this advancing profession to encroach on any of their territory. Neither did midwives, many of whom had received formal training. They did not welcome the surgeon's intrusions, as it represented a threat to their livelihood and recognized area of expertise. End quote. So, what became of this clash? What approach did these men who felt they deserved money, respect, and power take? Well, since barber surgeons were most often called in cases where complications arose, like excess bleeding or where it seemed likely that the fetus would have to be manually extracted, these up-and-coming obstetricians saw a way in. Quote, their attendance at traumatic cases helped them develop a disease orientation to childbirth, and they held a competitive advantage over midwives due to those skills or practices in dealing with complications. Derogated by physicians and forced to compete with midwives, they had to make themselves marketable. If most women viewed pregnancy as a normal, natural event, then the surgeon's services would not be required. If, however, pregnancy was seen as an illness, then their presence might appear to be more appropriate. End quote from Laura's article titled The Evolution of Maternal Birthing Position. My friends, this angle was expertly executed by a surgeon who, in his own right, had exceptional skills with a blade, the written word, and really knew how to rock a wig. Yeah, you need to see this artist's rendering of Francois Mauricio, whose luscious wig cascades down to his shoulders and has a smirk that clearly says, "Girl, I wrote a book, 18 chapters long, each including detailed dissections of the female body labeled with bangers like, quote, of the parts of a woman destined to generation, end quote. I added illustrations of the fetus in the womb, and I poetically instructed my fellow surgeons how to save lives in the event of the absolute worst." My friends, that smirk goes on to say, I was the first to provide a written account of how to prevent congenital syphilis by providing prenatal treatment. The first to discuss tubal pregnancies, how to control fever in mothers post-birth, and what to do in the event when the umbilical cord slips around the child. It was me, all me, just me. Ooh, my friends. In 1668, Francois' book, The Diseases of Women with Child and in Childbed, was such a blockbuster. It was translated into 7 languages. He wrote this book by age 31. He was considered a genius. And he even had a tragic backstory. His sister died of a hemorrhage during childbirth. When he spoke, people listened. Or rather, whatever he wrote, people took as gospel, if you will. And as you can tell by the title of the book, he really leaned into the idea that pregnancy should be handled as an illness. For example, in that anatomy lesson I mentioned a moment ago, the one called Of Parts of a Woman Destined to Generation, he claims that the womb, quote, causeth most diseases in women, end quote, and later on that pregnancy is, quote, a tumor of the belly, end quote. And speaking of which, as with all sicknesses, it's best to lie the fuck down. But of course, he said that in a much more polite and sweeter manner. Quote, all women are not accustomed to be delivered in the same posture. Some will be on their knees, as in many country villages. Others standing upright, leaning with the elbows on a pillow, upon a table, or on the side of a bed. But the best and surest is to be delivered in their bed, to shun the inconvenience and trouble of being carried thither afterwards, end quote. Yes, he wrote thither. I mean, reading that, coming from this guy, it must be true, and it must be for the benefit of the lady, right? Well, maybe a little. But my friends, if you're a surgeon, here to roll up your sleeves, save some goddamn lives, and conduct miracles, even if there is no need, because there is a need, of course, because pregnancy is an illness, you can't do that if the lady is sitting. You need to see everything, if you get my drift. The best way to see what's happening here is if you have the best view, and the way to get that is if it's all eye level. What became known as the French position was born. No pun intended. But, and of course there's a but, that might not be the end of the story. There might just be a parallel timeline here that had influence. And it's kind of gross. As such, it's worth bringing up. Some historians can trace the change in birthing position to King Louis XIV, a contemporary of Mauricio. From the mid-1600s to the early 1700s, He had a whopping 22 children over his lifespan with a number of wives and mistresses, and boy howdy, he wouldn't miss their births for the world. For you see, watching women give birth, in pain, was his kink. But there was a problem. And if the king had a problem, we all had a problem. It was these damn birthing stools. These chairs, they obstructed his view and his fun. And so he ordered his wives and mistresses to lie in bed. Oh, and the king only wanted male accoucheurs, or assistants, in the room as well. As to the direct impact all of this had on the public, well, historians and social scientists like Laura noted that the influence of the king's policy can't be fully known to us here today in present times, but we do know that the behavior of royalty can lead to trends. Louis XIV's very well documented demand did coincide with the shift from sitting or squatting to the more reclining. Either way, what the fuck? Thank you for listening, rating, subscribing, telling your friends about the black frogs of Chernobyl. That in less than 40 years, they completely shifted color and just having the time of their lives. Tell them while they're eating about the reclining birth position. Like mid-chew. Don't even wait for them to swallow. And a radioactive thanks to the folks over at Airwave Media, the podcast network to which WTI belongs. If you love this show, and you do, you love the other podcasts in this family. And please, stay interesting.